Welcome, everyone. I'm Bill Carney of Sustainable San Rafael, and this is Belle Cole of Organizing for Action. We're the Thanks. We're the co-chairs of the Time to Lead on Climate Coalition, and we want to welcome you on behalf of our 13 partner organizations that have come together to help galvanize the awareness and the action that we need to solve the climate crisis. This is our 5th event dedicated to that purpose. You can see all of our partners highlighted in blue in your program, which will be your guide for the evening. The best outcome of these events is collaboration. The coming together both of our partner groups, but also of a huge and growing number of other community groups and businesses and churches, schools, government agencies, and more that are all rolling up their sleeves and working in concert to address this crisis that affects us all. We can see that this evening in the 50-plus groups that have participated in the Marin Climate Action Showcase that you've all just been enjoying outside. Also we'll be able to enjoy later tonight because there'll be some sweet treats out there after the program. And also a chance to keep talking and keep staying informed on what everybody's doing here in Marin. I want to thank all the groups for the success of the showcase. It's really been phenomenal, and especially the amazing work of our partner, Drive Clean Marin, and its chair, Carleen Cullen. They've done a wonderful job in making the showcase happen. And again, to everyone who's helped out, all of our showcase partners and supporters, and very importantly, the contributors of the great food and wine and drink that we've been enjoying, and our incredibly generous star sponsors listed on the back of your program. Again, hold on to this program, keep it. It is your guide to climate action in Marin. Get to know these groups and participate with them. And now to get the evening underway, here's Belle Cole.
Hi, everybody. You know, government is among our most powerful ways of working together to solve climate change. And we're incredibly fortunate here in Marin to have public servants committed to climate action. We're honored to have with us tonight supervisors, mayors, and council members from 2/3 of the government jurisdictions in Marin. We'll hear from 2 supervisors and 2 mayors later in the program, along with state, national, and global climate leaders. I want now to recognize others in our audience. Please stand and remain standing when I call your name, and for the audience, please hold your applause until all are standing. Marin Supervisor Katie Rice. Well, and there's Corte Madera Mayor Robert Ravasio. Well, Corte Madera Council Member David Kunhardt. Yay. Fairfax Council Member Bruce Ackerman. San Rafael Council Member Kate Collin. Yay. Tiburon Council Member Alice Fredericks. State Water Board Chairman Felicia Marcus. Mayor of San Rafael Gary Phillips. And Eric Luan, the Novato City Council. If there are other mayors or council members here, let me know. Please join me in applauding these climate leaders. And I would also like to extend a special welcome to the just hired manager of Marin Drawdown, Alex Portashower. Would she stand, please? And yay! And to all our guests from beyond the Bay Area, from other states and countries, Please stand. Thanks for being here in solidarity with the future of our planet. You are from, yeah. And now on to the substance of the evening. Marin is especially fortunate to have a thoughtful and climate-active Board of Supervisors led by the current president, Damon Conley, who co-leads the Drawdown Marin campaign. Damon was also a founding member of the MCE Clean Energy Board, serving as the chair from 2011 to 14. He previously had San Rafael's climate action efforts while a city council member. Please welcome Supervisor Connolly.
Good evening and welcome to Marin County, everyone. As president of the Marin Board of Supervisors, along with my colleague, Supervisor Kate Sears, we welcome you to our beautiful home. It's so wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces tonight, but also a lot of new faces. And that's really been one of our overarching goals. And particularly, we are joined by folks from around the world this evening. This week saw an unprecedented focus on climate action. Stories from all over the world about why we must dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and how it is achievable, although, as we know, not easy. Tonight, we will hear from the world-renowned architect of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. We will hear perspectives from Washington, from Sacramento, and from Marin leaders about what is being done now. We will hear tonight that we must see emissions begin to fall by 2020. California has set an ambitious goal this week by committing to 100% renewable energy by 2045. Let's give it up for that. We in Marin are aligned with the state and aim to be an example for what can be done. Through setting ambitious goals, hard work, collaboration, and yes, optimism, we can comply with the Paris Agreement with or without Washington. As we open this evening's conversation, I want to share a little bit about Marin County's environmental legacy, something we can all be proud of. This has been long-standing, from pioneering efforts to protect open space to launching the first community choice energy program in the state of California, MCE Clean Energy. We have a wealth of knowledge and expertise in our residents, what I always say is our best asset. I was so impressed by our community businesses, nonprofits, and other partners displaying all that we were doing in Marin that you saw as you came in through the showcase. I am so proud of this community in taking on the tough choices and coming up with new tools to not just mitigate climate change, but to reverse the impacts of global warming, which is what we need to do. This evening gives us the opportunity to engage with international experts. And it gives us an opportunity to show you all Drawdown Marin, our community-wide campaign to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and do our part locally to preserve the planet for future generations. In a word, we want to electrify Marin. When Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord last June, it didn't stop Marin. We need to keep going and speed up. Government cannot do this alone. Individuals cannot stop climate change alone. Businesses cannot single-handedly reduce climate change. Coming together as a community will pay for itself with improved health, resiliency, a stronger economy, and more job creation. As Al Gore said the other night, solar installation is the fastest growing job in America. Followed by wind turbine technicians. That says a lot. Marin and the North Bay are well positioned to provide job training through partnerships with labor, businesses, and local schools and colleges. So I say, let's get started. This evening, we will have an opening conversation with Daniel Kamen and Christiana Figueres. Then Matthew Rodriguez, who we also know as Matt, and Congressman Huffman will join the conversation. Before the discussion turns to the local level by bringing in Marin County Supervisor Kate Sears, Marin Mayors Josh Friday and Stephanie Moulton-Peters, and student activist Cameron Evans, a real superstar, I might add. Cameron, where are you? All right. As questions for the speakers occur to you throughout the evening, please write them down on the cards you found on your chair.
You should allow three questions from the floor, otherwise it's controlled speech, not free speech.
Duly noted. We will be collecting your cards throughout the evening, so please pass your questions to the aisle. So at this time, I want to welcome to the stage my longtime friend, Daniel Kamen. At UC Berkeley, Dan holds faculty positions in the Energy and Resources Group, where he is chair, and the Goldman School of Public Policy. He was appointed the first Environment and Climate Partnership for the Americas Fellow by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in 2010, and then Science Envoy for the U.S. State Department by President Obama and Secretary Kerry. He resigned from the National Service after the despicable events in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. Yeah, that's definitely worthy of a round of applause. Dan is a founder of the Renewable and Appropriate Energy Laboratory. He has founded or is on the board of over 10 companies and has served as a contributing or coordinating lead author on or for an intergovernmental panel on climate change, which shared the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. While known internationally, he has always been generous with his time in advising local communities on how we can achieve our goals. So please join me in a great welcome for Dan Kamen.
Thank you so much. Well, I also want to add my welcome and thanks for everyone for being here and for our committee for organizing it. And I just want to give one more hand for all of the great food and information that was out front. So thank you all for being here. I also want to thank my wife and daughter for coming out, even though I know there's tests and schoolwork to do. It was very kind of them to come out for the evening. So Dilla and Lara, thank you so much for being here as well. So as you heard, we have a really interesting and I think important format. This is an expanding dialogue, meaning we will start off with a conversation largely about the events in the international climate process, where Christiana has played a critical, I would say, central role in this effort. And then we will bring in, as you heard, state and then a more local conversation as we go to make this about not only how we see the planetary sustainability, but how to act on it at the state and regional levels, the Republic of California, and the local level, and move this to an effort that is really what is being called more and more, not just an energy and sustainability transition, but a just transition, meaning it focuses on equity, jobs, economic diversity, and opportunities for minority groups and those who've been oppressed in a variety of ways. And I hope that all of those themes will come up here in the conversation. So I'm looking forward to both the comments from our speakers, but also to your questions as we move through the process. So before I bring up a really sort of an honored guest at the proceedings, not only here in Marin, but the whole week in DC, I just want to give just a few seconds on what I would say is the progression of process that we've seen in the international debate. We've had now 23 of these COPs, these Conference of the Parties, the international meetings on climate, going back to COP3, the Kyoto Protocol, going to the COP in Copenhagen, COP15, that we're calling a failure, even though in some ways it actually set the ground for success. And then the really remarkable efforts that Christiana has led us on up to and past the Paris Climate Accord, where the global community agreed to this 2-degree rail. And when I say 2-degree rail, that's 2 degrees C, and we've already used up 1 of those degrees. So we have basically frittered away half of our headroom to get to the climate goals we need to get to. And what we'll talk about in a bit with what's taken place locally, CCAs, what California has done, what a number of really innovative actions that have taken place in Europe, places like Kenya, a whole variety of places you might not think are climate leaders, are all really part of this broader dialogue on getting to green. And those of you who attended the parts of the summit this week or the many side events, including this one, I hope we'll get a real flavor of the degree to which we now see a clean energy transition as possible, but it's also one that needs to be sustainable on land, on food, on equity and jobs. And the protests out front of the climate conference were a really important example of understanding that this is not just about going from dirty energy to clean energy. It's about going from an increasingly inequitable and unjust society to one that puts those themes at the front. In fact, one of the pieces that upsets me the most in the process is that we know how to put solar panels and fancy electric cars in the garages of rich people, but we are far behind in making that equitable process. And so I spent a few days earlier this week with Senator Kevin De Leon installing solar in Bayview Hunters Points and learning how to make this a process that's not socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor, but it's equity for all. So let me invite Christiana Figueres up to the stage. She's a global leader on climate. She was executive secretary of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. That's this COP process of meetings. And that's been essential in the dialogue that moved us beyond what happened in Copenhagen to a remarkable effort in Paris, where not only was the 2-degree level agreed to, but the so-called high ambition coalition of nations, which Christiana spent infinite hours negotiating with, called for 1.5 degrees. So being more aggressive than the negotiators went in with even at the beginning of the process. She directed the Conference of the Parties in Cancun in 2010, Durban 2011, Doha 12, Warsaw 13, Lima 14, and then the Paris Agreement. And I think one of the features that's so critical is that all groups, those that are in agreement and those that are warring parties in this process, all look to her to be the adult in the room, a leader that thinks about how to make this process just and equitable. And I've had the pleasure to be a co-author with her on a paper that was part of the effort that launched one of her current efforts, Mission 2020, which recognizes that while there's a lot of good ideas, we've frittered away a great deal of time. And Christiana's steadfast approach to saying 2020 needs to be not the point where we sign some other agreement, but that we have tangible evidence that we're making a change. So Christiana, welcome to the stage. Thanks. Say hi to your brother for me too. I haven't seen him in about a year. I'm going to bring him up so you're right over here. So those cheers are for you, and for a very good reason, because what we've seen, I think, in the last few days at the meeting here is that it is possible to get this done, but I'd love if you could tell us just a little bit more about what you saw as the movement from Paris to this climate action conference here in San Francisco. How about this one? I'll go with this one, but let's hope that Christiana's is on.
Is mine on?
Why don't you, we'll
Did
pass.
somebody say yes and somebody say no? Swallow the mic.
Why don't we take the, we'll pass it.
Yeah, okay,
Let's
that's fine.
use the good ones.
Sure, okay. Well, thanks very much.
I'll hold it for you.
I'll use this one. I think, is this on? No? Are you serious?
I'll hold it here.
This is so weird. Okay.
You know what? It's there. It's feedback. A little science. It's feedback between the mics. So let's get this one. Yeah.
Turned it off.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay.
How about that?
5 hours later, do we have the technology down? Okay. Okay, well, first of all, thanks very much for the invitation tonight. And so the reason why this is exciting to me tonight is because, you know, the Paris Agreement is a fantastic and well-negotiated business plan, let's call it. It's a business plan for the planet. But what did you say? More to the mouth? Honestly, is it really, really bad acoustics in here? Is that right?
Strange.
Okay, hold on. Does it help if I stand? Okay. Sometimes it's just better. Right. So the Paris Agreement is a very good business plan, I would say, for the planet. But like any business plan or any good intent, if it's not implemented, it doesn't have any effect. And what is fantastic about the moment that we're in right now is that this is the time when national governments are actually in the observer's seat.
Try this. Sorry. Can you describe the progression from Paris to this Climate Action Summit in San Francisco?
Right. Thank you for refocusing me. I've never had so much fun with technology. So in the Paris Agreement, which is a good business plan but needs to be implemented, because we knew ahead of time that no matter how much each of the countries that signed up to the Paris Agreement, 195 countries, no matter how much they looked into the future, they would not have full visibility into what they could really do. Way back in 2014, which is when the contributions from countries were actually registered. So we knew it would be insufficient, right? To everybody who says, well, the Paris Agreement is insufficient. Really? You're just discovering that now? We knew that years ago. It is totally insufficient in the following sense. It is insufficient because it was never meant to be a static agreement. It was always conceived as an agreement that would accompany the decarbonization of the global economy over decades. And what countries put in, registered under the Paris Agreement, under the name of nationally determined contributions, was only the first tranche, the first vintage, the first gathering, the first harvest of what they could see was going to be possible. And since 2015, since the Paris Agreement was adopted, everyone has continued their decarbonization process. Technologies have fallen in price. As I'm sure you all know, the price of solar has dropped, the price of wind has dropped, the price of batteries is dropping. And more finance is flowing toward all of those solutions. And policies, such as New California policy, Yay California, is moving forward. And so all of that means that what the countries registered way back when, in 2014 or 15, is frankly by now obsolete. It is what my daughters would say, so 5 minutes ago. Because we have new technologies, right? The market has moved. And we so much better understand all of the benefits that come from it. So the time has come where we are beginning to get ready for the first step up that is prescribed in the Paris Agreement, which will occur in 2020. Because every 5 years, and this is already a legally binding component of the Paris Agreement, every 5 years, countries, national governments need to come together, assess how much they have been able to do, what the technology has advanced, the finance, the policy, and then say, right, because all of that has already been harvested, now here is our next contribution. So a step up, and every 5 years that will occur until we get to zero net emissions by 2050. So we're getting ready for that first step up in 2020. That is why this moment is really interesting from a county, from a state, from a city, from a corporate point of view, because it is not the national governments that actually are the highest emitters. And if you're not the highest emitter, you don't have the highest potential to reduce your emissions. It's actually everybody else. It's cities, it's states, it's provinces, it's counties, it's corporations. That's where the emissions are. And together, of course, they make the national emission. But where they are locally is with each one of us. And so right now we're in that space where now just at the Global Climate Action Summit, we had more than 70 mayors of cities, 80 leaders at provincial or state or regional level who came in, 300 corporate leaders, all of them saying, this is what I'm doing. And I'm doing more than the Paris Agreement actually expected, because it's possible, and because it's profitable, and because it's good for health, and because it's good for transport, and because it's good for energy independence, and it's because it creates jobs. That's why everybody's doing it. Frankly, nobody's doing it to save the planet. They're all doing it out of self-interest, thank heavens.
So Christiana highlighted this key feature that we're seeing action even without Washington, D.C. at the subnational level. And we were at a session together on, I think it was Tuesday, but it blurs now, where the under 2 MOU representatives all got up and said what they're doing. They highlighted in one place in Kalimantan in Indonesian Borneo that they're preserving forests and pushing back against palm oil, and that Portugal is installing not only onshore wind but offshore wind. You get this real diversity of efforts. And in terms of moving us quickly, this has been the antidote, I would say, to what Washington, D.C. and this sort of lack of interest in the process. Christiana highlighted that the costs have been lower than people thought, and every time we discover a new effort, a new initiative, building efficiency, investing in girls, a whole variety of things that may or may not seem related to climate in the beginning, we see these things are cheaper than they might otherwise be. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about the range of efforts, both international and some of the national efforts, that seem to tie things that are not just strictly about carbon, that are proving better for our societies and better for our communities.
Yeah, well, ultimately, in order to have the environmental integrity that we do need to count everything in equivalent tons of CO2. But that's not why we do it, right? And I am increasingly excited about the revolution around electric vehicles to begin with, because we already have 8 countries that have actually moved forward to either already ban the use of the internal combustion engine, or, yeah, very cool. Or to be considering already the date in which they will ban. And yeah, of course, so it's the usual suspects. It's Norway and France and, you know, all of the California, the country of California. But it's also unusual suspects, also unusual. Would you believe that India has actually already decided that as of 2030, no more sales of internal combustion engines? India. How cool is that? Now, again, are they doing it because they want to save the planet? No. They're doing it because they have, both India and China, people who live in those 2 fantastic countries, have this bad habit of wanting to breathe. And they would much rather breathe clean air than disgusting air. So they're banning the internal combustion engine because they want to clean up their air, because they're concerned that there are 700 million people around the earth who die prematurely every year because of pollution. That is just immoral. It should be no more tolerated. That in 2018, we are still killing our people with pollution. 9 out of 10 people around the earth are still breathing polluted air. And the last report that came out of the Lancet Commission on air pollution, do you know where they put the United States, to not pick on India and China as much? On a scale of, 1 to 200 more or less of countries. Where do you think the United States comes out? 100? 200? Okay, 1 being the worst and 200 being the best. The United States is, so where are we? The what? No, well, not quite the worst. 6th in the world, sandwiched between Bangladesh and Indonesia. Good job, US, right? Good job. I mean, how is it possible? Honestly, how is it possible? So just on health, let alone all of the other benefits that everyone is actually moving on that have to do with better transportation just because it's more efficient, or energy independence, or having more green areas in cities and counties and states. Just on that, so many countries, so many cities, so many provinces are beginning to revolutionize electricity, vehicles or transport actually, and just, picture in this state in particular, I don't think it requires too much imagination to imagine that 10, 15 years from now, transport is not going to be about buying a product. It's not going to be about buying a vehicle. It's going to be about buying the service. And that service will take you from A to B at the hour that you want. You will never have to buy a vehicle. You'll get in the vehicle, you'll start putting your makeup on, answering the emails, doing whatever, and there will be no driver in the car, right? I mean, how cool is that? It is so cool. So I actually think, that climate is just a fantastic playground to modernize society and to prepare us for a century that is going to be dramatically different and so much better than last century. It's going to be cleaner, it's going to be more just, it's going to be much, much more stable, much safer. It's going to be the kind of world that we have envisioned, but that we have been so blind that we haven't created it, and it takes something with the impact of global climate change to wake us up and go, dudes, get the program, get with the program, right?
So Christiana, you and I have been attending COP meetings for a long time. In fact, I've been attending so long that they're even recycling locations. I've been to 2 COPs in Marrakesh by now. I believe you have as well. And the players, the individuals who go to those, the things we see are changing, and you mentioned a new century. One of the features that I've been most excited about is to see this diversity of new people coming in, and women, no question. So here, Fran Pavley, author of our climate bill, your key role in this, President Bachelet from Brazil, people who have really, I think, changed the dialogue. Can you speak a little bit about what we've benefited from by getting a more diverse set of individuals in this process, in particular women?
In particular women. Well, my sense is that if you have 100% of human potential, it doesn't make any sense to just use 50%. Right? I mean, so dumb. So just by using 100% of our human potential, we're already better off just by that. But also, I have a slight prejudice, okay? So I have never been a man. I have never aspired to be a man. I'm quite delighted to be a woman. And so I'm a little bit prejudiced toward our gender, right? So I actually think that that male and female leadership are fantastic when they're paired and when they're complementary to each other. And I think that for thousands of years, we have benefited from the leadership of males. But now we're beginning to benefit from the leadership of males with females. So the question is, what's different about it? And I think that the contribution of females in general, I'm not saying that you guys don't have it, it's just that we have a little bit more than you guys. So I think the contribution of female leadership is I think that we have a more innate, it's not that it can't be learned, but we have a more innate capacity to think and act long term. I think, and that's why it has to be complementary, right? Because males are so much more on today. And you have to be both today and tomorrow. You have to do both. The other thing that I think that women do better at is, I think we juggle more things. I guess people agree with that, right? We just juggle more things at the same time, right? I mean, call it multitasking or whatever, but we're just born like that, or, you know, our kids make us like that. I don't know. But we're just capable of dealing with complexity better. We're not scared of the complexity, we actually embrace that complexity. And believe you me, climate is a little bit complex. So I think that was also very, very helpful. And the other thing that I hope that female leadership does is to embrace differences, and in particular, not just, you know, the differences that we see, but the differences that we don't see, which sometimes are even more important. So to embrace the differences of the needs and the interests of countries and citizens and people who come from a completely different background, a completely different history, thousands of years, and be able to recognize and to honor that every single human being is unique, has their own particularities, and has an equal voice and an equal right. And I just think that we're a little bit more sensitive to that. It doesn't mean that you guys are not sensitive to that. It's just that we do it a little bit better. I'm sorry.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Two more, okay.
So now that you've given us the long-term view, and be better at that, one of your short-term efforts is to highlight how critical it is to get real things done by 2020. And this paper that you led, and many of us, Governor Brown, myself, many others signed on to, was a call for action now, between now and 2020, so that we don't make the pace of change required so incredibly expensive that we bankrupt ourselves doing something that if we'd actually taken action, we could have got to. So can you describe what you're doing right now with Mission 2020?
Yeah, so the year 2020 has turned out to be the pivotal year now on climate for two reasons. One, I've already explained from the political perspective, because it was already ingrained into the Paris Agreement that countries would come together again in 2020 with their step-up ambition. But in addition to that, because the universe is wise, in addition to that, 2020 has been determined by science as being the last moment at which we, the citizens of the world, have to be able to put ourselves in the position of beginning the descent. And I think, Dan, you talked about that at the very beginning. We have to begin the descent, the global descent of emissions by 2020. That is a very tall order right now, because we're still on the up. We're still increasing our emissions. Not in every country. We have 40 countries around the world that have already peaked their emissions and are beginning to come down, including this wonderful country, by the way. But on average, or globally, we are still continuing the increase of emissions. And if we do that, we will be eating up our space very quickly and not be able to have the space or the time to descend in a smooth way. We would have to do what Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, calls the jump to distress. we would have to call off so many investments, so many fixed assets right now. We would have to call them off, shut them down prematurely, because the disruption would be so huge that we would go into what the insurance companies call systemically uninsurable world. That doesn't mean that you can't insure your house. It means nobody can insure their house. It means nobody can insure their business. No one, nothing. Systemically uninsurable, because the risk would be so high. So we can't go into that. And so we don't want to put ourselves in the position of having to take draconian measures. We want to be able to do a smooth and just transition that includes everyone, that is smooth from an economic point of view, so that you don't have to lose the value of those assets as abruptly as we would do if we overshoot. So 2020 looms large. It looms very large, and the whole purpose of the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco this week was precisely to show, very much like you had your showcase here, to show on the global scale what is already occurring on decarbonization, to give national governments the confidence that next year they can start their step-up process, because they need to step it up next year. They need to start that whole revision and get their contributions ready so that they can register them in 2020. So the whole point was for enough from the private as well as from the subnational sector to have evidence there of decarbonization that is already occurring, that is making a difference, for the national governments to feel the confidence to say, yes, I can go to 2020 and increase my ambition.
So last question, we'll have to do the lightning round version, and that is that when I started working on energy, I was working on cook stoves and small wind turbines in Nicaragua and in Costa Rica and elsewhere, and I got criticized by saying, you're trying to solve a global problem 1 watt, one household at a time. What do we really know now as the ability to scale up these local actions? I mean, is it enough?
Well, everything is local, right? Everything is local, and everything has to occur somewhere. I mean, please tell me some emission reduction that doesn't occur somewhere in some geography, in some town, right? So it is really very artificial to say, oh, no, we have to do everything at the global level. The global level is only the sum total, the arithmetic total of what is occurring at the global level, at the local level. And the work that needs to be done is at the local level, whether that means in your company, in your home, in your community, in your city, in your state, whatever boundary you want to take. But there is no such thing as the global occurring in the abstract. It just doesn't exist. It's the sum total of all local action. And that is why it is so important what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Really a pleasure. So now we continue to expand the conversation, and in the next phase of the game, microphones willing, which we'll see how that goes. Both Matt Rodriguez, our secretary for the California EPA, and Jared Huffman, our congressman, will be joining me on stage in a bit, and we'll do 10 minutes with each. Okay. Matt Rodriguez, who I hope many of you have worked with here in Marin and elsewhere, has worked on a range of issues. He was appointed in 2011 by Governor Jerry Brown, and he oversees a dizzying list. The California Air Resources Board, which is itself chaired by Mary Nichols, that manages the California greenhouse gas portfolio, but also, get ready, the Departments of Resources and Recycling and Recovery, the Toxic Substance Control, Pesticide Regulation, and the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, and the State Water Resources Control Board. So I don't understand how you get anything done. I'm glad to know you get to walk a dog every now and then with an agenda like that. He came to the agency after over 24 years in the Department of Justice, and so Matt, both thank you for being here and welcome to the stage. And Congressman Jared Huffman was sworn in to represent the massive 2nd District here in Marin. He's an environmental champion. He's been the author of many bills at the federal level, but before that in the state assembly, he was, I believe, 80 or more bills he's been the author of, many of whom I make my students study, I show to my friends and neighbors, I put them on mailboxes when people aren't listening around a whole variety of environmental controls. He's been a leader on the environmental fight, and in these dark days in Washington, D.C., it's a real pleasure to have a real visionary and a source of light. Thanks so much. So again, microphone's willing. I'm going to start with Matt, and then we'll move to the conversation with Jared. And so let me just start off with kind of the two initial biggies in the room, and that is at the Climate Action Summit on the first day, Governor Brown signed Senate Bill 100 and an executive order. And if you could describe a little bit, first Senate Bill 100 on electricity, and then we'll move to the executive order.
Well, let me first say that I was listening to Christiana, and I said, why did I agree to come on after her? I could have easily sat out there and listened to you for the rest of the evening. So that was just a wonderful presentation, so thank you very much. And now hopefully that's given me enough time to think about what I'm supposed to say here. Let's go to the point that was being made by Christiana so well, which is that we all knew the Paris Agreement was going to solve everything because technology is changing. So let's see what we can do now. Let's agree on our overall objective, and let's think about how we're going to get there. And really what you see in California is how that's played out through the years. When there was that first discussion of can we get to 33% renewables by 2020, when that discussion came up in 2006 and that time period, everybody said, well, you can't do that, so don't set an unreasonable goal. And so as we made progress, everybody said, well, no, hold it, we're going to be able to do that by 2020. Let's think about what we should be doing for 2030. So in 2030, let's think about maybe we can be at 50%. And that was just decided a couple of years ago through legislation. We would aim for 50%. So what's happened, I'm building up to the conclusion, trust me, that we're already basically at 33% ahead of our 2020 goal. And then if you look ahead at the way things are developing, we're going to hit that 50% probably in the early 2020, 2022, 2023. So then the new legislation that comes through says, okay, we're going to, 50%, even though we just adopted that the other day, let's aim for 60% in 2030. And then, you know what? By 2045, we can have carbon-free energy. And so that's the goal in SB 100. That's where we're going to go. And what we want actually is to be a carbon neutral society by 2045. And then let's look beyond that to see what we can do to actually have a sequestering effect and take carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's the goal.
And this is a really exciting 1-2 punch. The 100% clean electricity by 2045, and then this path to think about becoming carbon negative. So regrowing trees, reinvesting in smarter agriculture, finding ways to both sustain and preserve the ocean so that we can really take advantage of the natural sinks. There's a whole variety of features here. Mm-hmm. Let me bring it back to the near term and the things that you have to deal with in terms of California EPA. Let me start off with probably the elephant in the room, and that is that Cal EPA has applied for successfully a series of waivers to be more aggressive than federal standards on vehicles, on a whole variety of things, year after year. We are now in challenging times, to put it mildly. How does Cal EPA think about its mandate and interact with the federal government right now?
Well, first off, a short story. It was January of 2017. I was meeting with representatives from the Netherlands, and we had our little flags, because you always put your flags out on the table to show you're working together. And they pointed to the California flag, and they said, California Republic, is that new? You
mean this?
Yeah. Well, we'll have to think about it. You can see it back there in the corner over there. Our relationships with the federal government. I will talk about the fact that I did spend 24 years in the Attorney General's office. Much of the early 2000s was spent in litigation against the federal government under the Bush administration. We had wonderful partners in the Obama administration. Now we're back to a situation where we don't have quite that same partnership, I will say, but...
We're going to talk about that, Jared.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, that, you don't want to overstate it. What you're going to see right now is that California has a large number of programs that are unique to the state. We're going to continue with all those programs. And when I was in Marrakesh right after the election in 2016, it was amazing how many countries would come up to us and say, what's going to happen now? And I said, well, California is California. We're going to continue to do what we're going to do. And we had partnerships with the federal government where we were working on regulating methane emissions. We worked with them on the Clean Power Plan and implementation of the Clean Power Plan. We had the waiver, and we had an agreement on emissions standards. There are attempts to roll those things back. But I will just stress there are attempts to roll those things back through our legislators and through litigation. We're going to do everything we can to continue those programs that got started by the previous administration. And if we need to go to court, then that's what we're going to do. So it's
And as I said, Matt was in the Department of Justice for 24 years, so he knows he can do. So let me ask the follow-on, though, and that is a number of states around the country have signed on with California and followed us. And can you describe the process to bring in the 16 or 18 other states and what that does in terms of this dialogue between the Republic of California and whoever it is in D.C.?
Well, I will say that that's one of the things that I used to hear back in 2011 when I first became secretary is, why is California doing all these things on its own? And I was saying to somebody earlier this evening, I don't hear that anymore, and I don't hear that anymore because at the international level, we've got the Under 2 Coalition and the 222 regional and national governments around the world that are supporting us internationally. And then at the national level, you're right, that there are a number of partnerships that we have established. The U.S. Climate Alliance is 16 governors and the governor of Puerto Rico joining together to say that we're going to continue to work on implementing the goals of the United States through the Paris Agreement. We're going to continue working together on things like, as you mentioned, carbon sequestration, cooperating on promoting zero-emission vehicles, looking at agricultural practice and forest practices that can sequester carbon. So there is a real partnership with other states and governors from around the world, and then you also see, or around the world, around the nation, but you also see the support that we're getting for our waiver and for our emission standards from other states that are working with us to defend those emission standards. There will be a hearing in Fresno week after next to discuss the proposal to perhaps rescind the waiver and freeze the emissions at 2021 levels. We're getting a number of calls from other states about, okay, how can we help? What do you want to do in that testimony? So we are not alone in this at all, and in fact, there's a large proportion of the United States that is obviously helping us. And then I'll say that what is equally of interest to me is I attend the Environmental Council of States, which is department leaders and environmental departments from around the country. And I'll tell you, every state is really looking at, what are we going to do on renewables? What are you doing on zero-emission vehicles? What are you doing in terms of forest management and agricultural practice? There's a great deal of interest in understanding if you can get beyond the politics in this new vision of this world that Christiana was describing.
So again, the last one has to be, So the last question has to be fast, and that is that things are not all rosy here in California. We have low-income people commuting long distances. We did not get everything we wanted in terms of regional interconnection on clean energy to make a bigger market. What's the biggest worry for you and what we're not getting done yet in California?
No, I think you've identified it, and I'm very glad that you've mentioned that. From the outset of this administration, we started to try and identify disadvantaged communities in the state. And by disadvantaged, I mean they are already burdened by pollution, and they don't have the socioeconomic resources to resist the problems attendant to that pollution by themselves. So we've identified those areas in the state, and we're trying to focus our funding in those areas to help those areas. So we're doing several things. Through our cap and trade program, we've generated $8.6 billion since 2012. By law, 35% of the cap and trade funds need to either go into low-income or disadvantaged communities. And the programs there are dealing with some of the issues that you identified, weatherization of buildings and providing transit, public transit, ride-share programs. We really need to work on that. And then through AB 617 that was adopted last year, we are looking at community-level pollution reduction programs because we understand that everybody needs to benefit from these programs. We fail if not all Californians are going to benefit from these programs.
So we're going to move it to a few minutes with Jared to talk about some of the actions. And thank goodness that you did so much here in California before going to DC, so you can wise them all up on how things actually get done.
We'll try.
Okay. So first thing, I mean, obviously, it can't overstate how trying the times are now. Rollback of the Clean Power Plan, Mr. Trump trying to do away with some of the positive things on spending on low-income communities, on methane leaks, a whole variety of things. Where do you see the biggest leverage? And I'm going to leave aside what might happen in November, but if we look at right now, where do you see opportunities to work across the aisle, even in this setting?
Well, thanks, Dan. I have the unenviable task of reporting to you from Washington, D.C., so I just say, don't shoot the messenger, please. And before I dive into that, because it's not pretty, let me just say I'm always looking for rays of hope on this subject, and there's a lot of rays of hope here tonight. I draw a lot of hope from the relentless brain power from people like you, Dan, and all the innovators and academics that are not going to give up, that keep on focusing on solutions. Christian, you're an inspiration, and you've got your finger on the pulse of the planet, and yet you seem excited about the future. So that's wonderful. And then, of course, the leadership from the state of California is something we should all be incredibly proud of and inspired by. So I'm excited about all that. Now let me tell you how rotten it is in Washington.
Get your wine out.
In terms of the trajectory we're on at the national government level, I guess we could pat ourselves on the back because between the years 2005 and 2017, our greenhouse gas emissions declined 17%. That's fairly good news. 2018, we're flat. And the projections going forward are either flat or rising, depending on which of these Trump policies go forward. So that should be fairly sobering. A lot of the reductions that we've been able to achieve during that time came from the transition from coal to natural gas. And with that comes an increasing amount of methane leakage. Now, the Obama administration was at least beginning to take some steps to address that, but like everything that the Obama administration was working on to reduce greenhouse gases and put us in a leadership posture on climate, the Trump administration is trying to roll it back. And in fact, if you look at all of the scaffolding, if you will, about that comprised our commitment to the Paris Agreement, the Clean Power Plan, fuel economy standards, addressing these methane leaks, addressing HFCs, and several other things. Point by point on every one of those things, the Trump administration is either already undertaking rulemakings to undo those things or is saying that it's going to. And they will tell you that it doesn't make much of a difference. For example, on this fuel economy stuff, the Trump administration really bends over backwards to try to say really doesn't even affect greenhouse gas emissions that much. Don't believe it. It's a big, big deal. The difference between where we were heading on fuel economy standards and where the Trump administration would roll us back to amounts to the annual national emissions of countries like Greece and Bangladesh and Austria. That's how big the difference just in that change between administrations can be. The other big place in which they're trying to roll us back is basically this keep it in the ground issue, how we begin to restrict fossil fuel extraction. And certainly the Obama administration wasn't going as far as I would like to go. I'm the author of the Keep It in the Ground Act that wants to phase out and shut down fossil fuel extraction. But you were seeing some places, the Arctic, certainly the Pacific coast and other places, off the table for new drilling. You were seeing safety standards and methane standards and other standards put in place that would make it harder to do indiscriminate fossil fuel extraction. Sally Jewell actually put a temporary moratorium on new coal leasing on public land. All of that was really important steps in the right direction. All of that under the Trump administration is being rolled back and then some. So that's troubling. And of course, we're challenging every one of these rulemakings and rollbacks in court. I'm co-sponsoring legislation to stop it. If we can get a majority in the House of Representatives, that will definitely help our ability to stop some of this. But I will just flag two more things for you, Dan, by way of all the bad news I have to report from Washington. The climate denial across the board from this administration is definitely taking its toll. And we don't have time to go through all the examples of this, but we're talking about the scrubbing of agency websites, the reassigning of experts, the kind of stigmatization and cultural change within the institutions of our federal government that are going to have a real corrosive effect and take a long time to undo, and also that undermine our ability to support through grant programs and other things innovation and science that we desperately need right now to help solve problems on climate policy. The last piece of my lousy report is the corruption. And we really shouldn't understate the significance of just how much this administration has handed the keys of government off to the fossil fuel and mining interests to line their pockets at our expense. That corruption is going to have to be undone too, and there are powerful, powerful political interests that will have to be confronted to get there. Now, all of this did not happen because of Donald Trump or because of Scott Pruitt or Ryan Zinke or any other bad guy that you can point to. I will submit to you that all of this happened because millions of people in 2016 decided not to vote. So hold that thought.
So on that thought of individual action, I was really honored to get to serve in the Obama administration as science envoy in the State Department, and after one Trump action after another, I resigned just a little over a year ago from that role. What do you see, though, in Washington as the opportunity to get citizens back engaged? When President Obama came in, we really saw an incredible upping of the quality of people across agencies. And my worry is that we've lost lots of people. How do we re-engage much more quickly than we did before? So voting, for sure, but what else do you see as an opportunity to get the kind of engagement that we have to have?
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. Public service right now we should be very grateful for the people at EPA and these other agencies that are sticking it out because they are miserable. And on the heels of this incredible tax giveaway that they passed last year, Donald Trump tells us we now can't even afford a cost of living increase for federal employees. So make no mistake, there is a very deliberate strategy here to beat down the whole concept of public service, but certainly, especially those who want to support science and environmental protection and some of the issues that we care a lot about. That's going to take us a while to undo. I wish we could turn it around like that, but we are losing people with incredible decades of experience because they're being run out of public service, and that may be the worst and most lasting negative legacy of this administration.
So last question, and all cameras can get turned off at this point. What do you see as the prospects to really flip the House and talk about the Senate briefly in November?
Prospects are good. Thank you for getting me to the good news. Yeah, I do bring good news. Look, you talked about getting people involved. People are showing up. Look in this room right here. This is fairly typical for this community. But the truth is, this is representative of something that's happening around the country. There was a governor's race in New York this last week. And I don't know if anyone noticed, but Governor Cuomo shellacked his Democratic opponent. It was a lopsided win. But get this. His opponent, Cynthia Nixon, got more votes in a lopsided loss than the number of people who voted for Cuomo 4 years ago. The wake-up call has gone out.
She won my county, Tompkins County, upstate.
And I think, like people always ask me how I even sleep because this is so crazy. And I always joke I sleep like a baby. I wake up screaming every few hours, right? So no matter how much sleep I lose because I'm at wit's end over Donald Trump and all of these things, and no matter how much sleep all of you lose, I want you to know Donald Trump is losing even more sleep this week. Okay?
Thank you so much. So on that note, we're going to have 10 minutes, which will go really quick with all these great people on stage. But we're going to do a couple questions for the group, and then we'll expand the conversation to really get local and get into some more of the details with some other great guests. So we'll pass the mics back and forth. Hope they don't interact too much. And that is a question for anyone here, really. Having just been through the climate summit, what do we now see as kind of some of the most exciting levers to pull in the coming months and years? What are you looking to do in the next little bit to really make this process go? For anybody.
I'm personally really excited about the finance sector moving, because I think the tech sector has moved, obviously energy, et cetera, but the big difference is going to be made when the financial sector finally gets religion and understands that they are investing in very, very risky assets. Hello? When investors understand that they are investing or are invested in very risky assets, and they have to actually pull out and begin to switch over. So I'm actually very excited about that. It's not going to be easy because we have to build sustainable infrastructure at the rate of $1 trillion per year in order to do this. So it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be profitable. And where profit is, money will flow.
Yeah, I will just say what's encouraging to me is the continued involvement of subnationals and regional governments in this whole discussion. We were fortunate to have representatives from all around the world, and so it really does address that question that we had in the United States, and it's an important message in the United States that we're not being asked to do things that other portions of the world are not being asked to do, and in fact they're stepping up and working on it. And so I think that's a very, very important message that we want to carry forward. And there are a lot of good stories about progress that's being made at the local and regional level in implementing these programs, and I think that's a very powerful message. And it does go along with the investors and the businesses that stepped up. We had 486, I think, businesses that have committed to work to the objectives of the Paris Agreement and work with the science in the Paris Agreement. So I think that's all very, very positive. It's just a question of how do we carry that to Poland at the end of the year.
May I be political in my response to this?
I'm hoping you'll be political in your response.
So I'm excited by two things. Number one, if this indeed shapes up as the wave election that I think it will, it's not going to just change the party in the majority. in the House of Representatives, it's going to sweep in a whole bunch of climate champions. And I've had the chance to meet a lot of our candidates from around the country, and I have never seen a class of candidates this amazing, dynamic. And among them are all of these clean energy entrepreneurs. There's a young man in Dallas, Texas named Colin Allred who's running against Pete Sessions, a climate
Good guy.
denier. And Colin will talk to you about the need to have a clean economy and to phase out fossil fuels in the state of Texas. That's pretty exciting. So that's, but then the second thing is Christian mentioned the significance scientifically of the year 2020. 2020 is a real important political year too, because it's a redistricting year. And rewind 10 years ago, my party got blindsided in state house races and congressional races around the country, and it set up a decade of gerrymandering and kind of a policy stranglehold that the climate deniers had. We are potentially poised to turn that back on them this redistricting year. We are poised to win state houses and state legislatures, as well as a congressional majority heading into that critical redistricting year. So I'm fairly excited and optimistic about the next 10 years.
In fact, I was really excited talking to a businesswoman actually from Kern County and a businessman from Texas, and they both highlighted they have a family history in oil and gas, but they're making more on their wind leases than their oil and gas leases. So it's important. Let me turn to a tough one because we've got you all together, and I don't want to tell the story wrong, but I'm also good friends with Cristiana's brother, Jose Maria, who was president of Costa Rica, and I believe, but you can correct me, he's still the only elected official to have passed a carbon tax while in office. And I hope I'm not wrong on that.
25 years ago.
Exactly right. Right. And so I want to ask each of you, what do you see as the prospects and the importance or not of carbon pricing, but not in cap and trade, but in thinking about taxes or revenue neutral, but to highlight what might be coming next in this process?
Not cap and trade? So that kind of takes Matt out
beyond cap and trade. So cap and trade also, but I mean, we're talking about taxes as well. So what do you think about carbon pricing, social cost of carbon, a number of the methods that we're talking about to think more broadly about putting a price on destroying the planet and destroying communities of color and destroying our natural environment?
Well, I will just briefly tell you that I think we are seeing some signs of progress on carbon pricing in the United States Congress. It's something that is going to have to be bipartisan, I think, and I am encouraged that a couple of my Republican colleagues, one in particular, Carlos Curbelo, is rolling out a proposal to have a carbon tax. Now, it's a flawed proposal. Let me be real clear. The trade-off for passing his carbon tax, which is set way too low, which is not constructed the way it needs to be, the trade-off would be we suspend enforcement of the Clean Air Act, okay? So we basically put all our eggs in the basket of carbon pricing and, hope it works, right? I don't think that's the way we need to go. But it's perhaps a sign that there's political safety in venturing out into this issue. Now, there's some other Republican proposals floating around Congress involving carbon taxes. The quid pro quo for those would typically involve things like permanent immunity for the fossil fuel industry against the kind of lawsuits the county of Marin is bringing, right? No thanks. I think they need to be accountable for their destruction of the planet, and so we'll continue to say no to bad ideas, but at least we're talking about it.
Yeah, I'll just say that, as you know, we've extended the cap and trade program in California to 2030, and we continue to have an escalating price in the floor for carbon. So, we've decided to go on that path, and as I said, take then the revenue that's generated by this program and reinvest it in our communities to make sure that the program is really benefiting all communities in California. That's very important. Having said that, We work with a number of states and regions from around the world that may have a emissions trading program, or they may be looking at carbon taxes. The important thing is to put a price on carbon and to really do so in a way that will make a difference within your society. So, we've decided on a path here in California that seems to be working. We've met our target for reductions for 2020 already. We've got a steep path towards 2030, but we're going to go ahead with that market. But I'll say that it's a market, but we've got many other programs that go along with it. We haven't put all our eggs in one basket. We've got our renewable portfolio standard. We've got sustainable communities planning. We've got the investments in zero emission vehicles. So we're trying a whole number of things. But however you put a price on carbon, that's what we're interested in doing and working with other governments on. And so, it is John Lennon, whatever gets you through the night is all right. So that's the way to go.
And that really is, I think, the special sauce of California, that we have all of these individual sectoral goals. Some work more effectively than others. We learn and we tweak them, and then we also have this carbon price in the background. And I want to sort of congratulate everyone here, because one of the features of California's landmark SB 32, our climate goal to 2030, is that it's the first one I know of anywhere in the world, but I would love to be corrected, that puts real money into environmental justice. California's puts 35% of our carbon revenues that are already up to $10 billion a year. 35% is the floor that goes into minority and communities of color and disadvantaged communities. And I actually think that when we look back at 2030, we will likely think this was the piece of the legislation that was the most transformative.
Yeah, I'll just add in and say that actually the expenditures are more like, you're right, the floor is 35, but we're actually putting in around 50% in these communities.
It's at the floor, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So to start with the U.S., about which I know nothing, is it not true that the Baker-Schultz proposal actually is very innovative, because they do want to put the revenues back into the citizens' pockets? Is that not correct?
So the
Is this the fee and dividend?
This is called, right, the so-called conservative approach to carbon. So we'll do real quick if we can, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, and I know we have some fee and dividend fans here in the audience. Citizens Climate Lobby, they are relentless in their organizing and activism on this issue. It's an elegant policy, and it does address the environmental justice issue and the potential regressive nature of a carbon tax. So I agree with Matt, though. Let's get whatever kind of carbon pricing we can. If I could find bipartisan support for fee and dividend, I'd be there tomorrow.
I know you've got a lot of people who would love to come and testify to help you out on that one.
But just to put a global perspective on that, let's not be deluded that there is no carbon price. The fact is, we have 60 jurisdictions around the world that have a price on carbon. 40 of them actually are what you would call a carbon tax, and the other 20, or the other way around, the 40 are emissions trading systems, and the other are taxes. But you have 60 jurisdictions that already have it and that are beginning to link with each other. Quite exciting is the fact that one of those jurisdictions is a set of cities in China, 7 cities to be specific, that have actually served as pilot cases in China, and that China will, by the end of this year, announce an overall national carbon market with a carbon price. So I am here to announce that everything that you purchase and use will have an embedded carbon price, because we all use things from China, right? And so that's really going to send a huge ripple effect across the global economy when you begin to have to include the carbon price in most everything that we use. Very excitingly, the last report that just came out 2 or 3 days ago from the Energy Transition Commission actually quantifies how much governments, either at the national level or at the state level, would have as revenue if we had a decent price on carbon around the world. Take $10 as the minimum, and it is an astonishing $2.8 trillion that would be in the hands of governments to do the good work that needs to be done.
It's very exciting. So now the stage is going to get really comfortable and crowded, and we're going to diversify the conversation quite a bit here. So I want to introduce the 4 people we're going to add to this party up here for the last round of questions. And we'll start with Kate Sears. And she's been an environmental champion in Marin for a long time on the Marin County Board of Supervisors. And then also Cameron Evans. Cameron's a senior at Marin School of Environmental Leadership and a dedicated environmentalist. She's worked to pass the Climate Inheritance Resolution through the San Rafael City Council, which committed the city to an ongoing youth program for climate. And she's also an intern at All One Ocean, so welcome up. It's an honor to get you up here as well. Josh Friday. Josh was actually a student of mine in what was the scariest class I ever taught, where Josh was in the class and Henry Stern were in class together. So that was a tough moment. But here we have the mayor of Novato. Thanks so much. And Josh has been an environmentalist since day one. He's president of the Golden State Opportunity Board. He's been involved in a number of efforts in the San Rafael City Council and Project Drawdown as well. And then finally, Stephanie Moulton-Peters, mayor of Mill Valley. Thanks so much. And she's on the Transportation Authority for Marin. She's part of the board of Marin Transit. She served as a smart board. And for the Marin Bay Wave Project. And we'll get just a couple minutes from each. And so we'll go down the list, and we've got 3 or 4 minutes to really hear about how this is taking place locally.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Good. So we in Marin are on the front line of climate change impacts. We're already experiencing rising sea levels and increased fire danger right here, right now. Local government at the county, city, and towns are the first line defenders for the climate change impacts we are already experiencing and in pushing forward the adaptation we need to live in this new world. If we are to successfully address the challenges we face and adapt to an evolving climate, what matters most is collective action and collaboration. In October 2017, the Marin County Board of Supervisors made a commitment to dramatically reducing greenhouse gas emissions and launched Drawdown Marin, our community-wide campaign to become the first fossil-free county. Our vision for Drawdown Marin is to catalyze climate action throughout the community through an extraordinary collaboration between local government, public agencies, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and residents of all ages, including our young people. I hope you have in your hand the Drawdown Marin flyer that suggests what you should do and what you can do right now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the 6 focus areas of the campaign. Not only can we not delay taking action, but it's time to really hit the accelerator. It's imperative that we change the way we think and how we make decisions as individuals and as policymakers. We must act with intention in everything that we do. For example, recent reports of increased hot weather have got people wondering if they should get air conditioning, something that most of us in Marin have not in the past given any thought to or thought we needed. Before we buy that air conditioner, let's learn about other cooling technologies, such as air source heat pumps, so that every decision we make as consumers is made through the lens of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting our environment. MCE Clean Energy, which I chair, can help us make the right good choices, whether through energy efficiency measures or their new $1.5 million rebate program to lower the cost of installing EV charging stations at workplaces and multifamily property. And let's choose to celebrate family events by planting trees, like my good friend Marty Winter on the Belvedere City Council did when he planted 72 trees to celebrate his wife Barbara's 72nd birthday. This is what acting intentionally is all about. Finally, I want to talk about money and litigation. Many of the actions we need to take to mitigate the impacts of climate change, to address rising sea levels, and adapt to our changing world are expensive. We cannot look to the federal government or to the state budget to provide the funds we need to improve our infrastructure, raise or divert our roads, relocate homes and businesses from high water areas, restore our wetlands, or fortify our coastal dunes. As elected officials, it is our responsibility to protect you, our constituents, and to take every action we can to prepare for the future and to make sure that you, as taxpayers, do not have to bear the full burden of the costs. And that is why, in July 2017, the County of Marin filed a lawsuit in state court against the fossil fuel industry for damages related to the sea level rise we are already experiencing and will continue to experience in the decades ahead. It's been more than 40 years since the fossil fuel industry's own experts warned executives about the potentially severe consequences of burning oil, gas, and coal. And nearly a quarter century has passed since Exxon and others launched a massive public relations and lobbying campaign to deceive the public, the press, and policymakers about those consequences. Our lawsuit isn't trying to solve climate change. It's simply trying to hold fossil fuel companies accountable and shift some of the costs back to them for the damage they knowingly caused. We need to take action on all fronts, and the time to act is now. For us, the most important actions are those we take here at the local level. And I'm hoping that we can designate Christiana as our patron saint of climate activism and creating the local change that we need to make happen to roll up to global climate impacts. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Does that sound okay? Okay, great. My name is Cameron Evans, and I am a 17-year-old senior from the Marin School of Environmental Leadership. First things first, I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for being here and being supporters in the fight to secure a future not just for yourselves, but for my generation and for my children's generation. Truly thank you all. While I wish I could say that I was an internationally recognized leader, a physicist, professor, policymaker, any of the above, I sadly cannot. I am the most average of teenagers who has simply discovered the power of her own voice. I bring that voice here tonight to represent the restless youth in a growing movement to change our planet for the better. I was lucky enough to discover the true key role of youth in climate change planning a year and a half ago at an amazing San Rafael City Council meeting. I appeared in front of the council that night hearing that they would be deliberating on whether or not to allot $27,000 to converting a portion of their energy to renewable energy from deep green from Marin Clean Energy. That night I appeared in front of the council to remind them that a few months earlier they had passed the Climate Inheritance Resolution, which committed them to aggressively updating their climate change action plan, creating an ongoing system for the youth to lend their voice to the matter, and of course being general leaders in climate change. I spoke to them with my huge amount, 16 years of wisdom, to urge them to see that it's not every day that a leadership opportunity comes around, and when it does, we have to take advantage of it. I was amazed to see the way that the city not only received well what I had to say, but actually valued what I and other youth advocates at that meeting were saying. It was truly amazing to see the way that another student there just stood in front of the council and said, "Is my future worth $27,000? That was the big one. I had to leave early that night because it was finals week. But the next day in class, as I read that the city had unanimously voted to allot $60,000 instead of $27,000 to converting 100% of their energy to deep green from Marin Clean Energy, I cried. both by my incredibly dedicated and generous city council, but also by the realization that I and others my age had the ability to foment change. Those same young advocates I met that night and so many others are doing amazing work around the area and all across the country. In Marin, we have organizations like Generation Our Climate and the Marin Youth Climate Change Summit, advocating for the youth voices to be valued and giving teenagers the resources they need to make the difference that we see. Some may say that the youth are too idealistic to lend our voices to such big matters, yet I think that that's kind of the point. If we're trying to get to this world that we all dream of, this amazing place of equity, clear skies, and education for all, don't we need a reason to get up in the morning when there's such a hopeless world out there? Don't we need someone to continue to remind us of our ideals so that we can get to the future that we all want to see? So with that, I hope to continue to urge a relationship to form between the youth and the adults of this area, and in less than 6 months, when I join the voting population of the US, I hope to continue to foment this relationship as much as I can to create the future that we all see and want. Now, I would love for any representatives of Generation Our Climate, the Marin Youth Climate Change Summit, any youth or anyone advocating for the youth to please stand now and receive the round of applause they deserve.
Well, I think Matt said earlier he was afraid to follow certain speakers. So I'll tell you, only because this man has been a JAG, he has been worked overseas, he's worked for Novato. Josh, you have the tough job of following that.
Hello? We there? Matt, we need a new lineup here. Welcome everyone, good evening. We call you the Climate Faithful. Welcome to Marin County. And I expect to hear some cheering from the raucous people in the bleachers back there throughout this. My name is Josh Friday. It's a real honor to be here. I'm really actually here because of Professor Kamen. And he doesn't know this, but when I took the class that he alluded to, it was because Henry Stern, who is now a state senator, and I happened to be bored. Hey, is that better? When I took the class with Professor Kamen, Henry Stern, who's now a state senator, and I happened to be bored in law school, so we decided to take the professor's undergrad energy science class that dribbled in a little bit of policy work. And at the end of this is mostly scientists, students who wanted to learn a little bit about policy. And at the end of the class, we went out to dinner with Professor Kamen, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Josh, I'm so inspired, and I admire so much your passion for clean energy and climate. I really think you should stick with the policy and politics stuff." And so I joined the Navy. I went on to run Tom Steyer's climate organization, Next Gen Climate, and run for mayor. And here I am with you today. Thank you, Professor Kamen. So I'm here to talk about what we're doing in Novato, because the whole theme of this last week and why we're here is to talk about what's happening local. And when it comes to the idea of it's time to lead locally, I could not be more proud of what we've embraced in the city of Novato. And I did get a little bit of a challenge when I got elected from Professor Huffman, Professor and Congressman, we call him Professor, Congressman Huffman, to say, what can you accomplish in the city of Novato? And so here's what we've accomplished, and I could not be more proud of it. I am so excited to announce today and say to all of you today, Novato has a very aggressive climate action plan, and we are, as of today, on target to meet our 2020 climate action goals. And we're on target because we have incredible people working in our city, like Bob Brown, who I see in the back, and we have Sustainable Novato, who is here, who rolled deep today. Thank you very much, Sustainable Novato. Because of the work and because of how seriousness we take this at the local level, Novato was the first city in Marin County to commit to get to 100% clean energy. And that was a year ago. Take that, Governor Brown. We were also the first city in Marin to change all of our light bulbs throughout all of our streets to LED, saving our city and our money and protecting our environment. And this is the thing I'm most proud of. After I got elected, several of us went to Bob Brown and we said, what do we need to do to really make our climate action plan real? What do we need to do to actually achieve our results. And he said the council needs to put resources behind it. And there's an old saying that's from a guy named Joe Biden, some of you may have heard of, who said, "Don't tell me your values, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your values are." And so we pushed through in the city of Novato a full-time sustainability and climate officer who wakes up every single day thinking about how to make our city more sustainable. And next week, she's hosting, and the city of Novato is hosting, a regional climate summit at the Buck Institute, where several of the people in this audience are going to be, to talk about how do we as city leaders and local leaders focus on climate change. And I'm so proud of our city for doing that. When I was asked to just speak very, very quickly about what we're doing for citizens, every quarter we're having a Citizen Climate Summit where we engage citizens of Novato and nonprofit leaders to come together and talk about climate. And when we think about what it means to act locally on this issue, I think about the question that Martin Luther King posed to all of us, sitting in a jail cell, writing a letter in a place called Birmingham, Alabama, when he said, "The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or the extension of justice?" And ladies and gentlemen, I say to you, when it comes to climate change, we must be extremists for the extension of justice for our kids, extension of justice for the next generation, and extension of justice for Mother Earth. Thank you so much for having me. Let's go get to work.
Mayor Moulton Peters.
All right. Great to share the stage with all of you and bat cleanup. So I am very proud to be representing the city of Mill Valley tonight and show that small cities can have a big impact on climate change. I have come back from the League of California Cities annual conference in Long Beach with a much coveted Beacon Award for Mill Valley for sustainability. This was an act of our community to reduce greenhouse gases in the community by 12%, in the city by 15%, and to get an award for our sustainability best practices. Now, this is the result of a lot of effort on a lot of people's parts, and it all started when I watched my colleague Damon Connolly receive the same award 7 or 8 years ago, and I had Beacon Award envy and said, Mill Valley's gonna get one of those. And so we worked and we worked. And how did we do it? Well, we went deep green with Marin Clean Energy. We put solar panels on our community center, on our police building, and on our community rooftop, and we heat our pool with solar panels. In fact, Mill Valley is one of the largest producers of renewable energy with our panels. We did a lot of other little things, silver buckshot we like to call it. We compost, we banned styrofoam and plastic, and we got the lights changed out to LED, and we did all those things that towns do, which is really great, and they're frankly the low-hanging fruit because they're buildings and fixed facilities, and they all stay in one place so they don't move, and you can change them out. Now, what are we going to do next on the horizon to meet our Paris climate change goals? And we are on track to do that by 2020. We are going to go after the herding cats of mobility and transportation. So we know this is 54% of Mill Valley and most every other town's greenhouse gas productions. And oh my Lord, how do we get all of you to do something different besides driving gas-fueled vehicles? Well, that's our challenge. So we've got a multi-pronged strategy to get folks out of their single occupancy cars, to switch out from gas fuel to alternative fuel and electric fuel, to get folks on bikes and walking. You need infrastructure to do this. You have to have the facilities in place before people can make the switch. So we need more electric vehicle charging stations. We need more bicycle lanes. We've finished Miller Avenue, and that's great. We just have to make Miller with our bike lanes connect to the rest of the town with bike lanes. And we're going to do that. I bought an e-bike this year, and what a game changer that is. If you haven't been on an e-bike, you got to try it. I've also been working with Cool the Earth and the Golden Gate Electric Vehicle Association on electric vehicle for myself and also for our community. And as I said, we need to get those charging stations in. We need to get them in multifamily homes, in our shopping centers, in our schools. And so Mill Valley will be developing a long-term EV deployment plan with all of our stakeholders in the city so that we get that infrastructure in place and people can drive electric. So I've been asked just to say a little bit about the partnership and the collaboration that exists here in Marin County. And we are so blessed that our cities and towns and our county work together. And this is how we're going to make a difference and a big impact in Marin County. We're a small county, but we have a very large impact. We collaborate. Small cities and towns don't have a lot of bureaucracy. That's a really good thing. We also don't have a lot of resources, so we must share and we must have innovation hubs in our cities and towns. We have wonderful resources in the county that provides us with leadership as well as staff support. But we have very innovative little cities, and we are busy making things happen. We have the Marin Climate Energy Partnership, where our planners are all working together to plan a greener future for us. We have the Marin County Council of Mayors and Council Members, where folks like myself and the other council members in the room here work together and share ideas. And we are a very collaborative county, so I think you will see good things happening in the future, and I am certainly committed to that in Mill Valley. Thank you.
So you all have been incredibly patient. We are just up against it on time, but I have a few questions, and I'm going to start with Cameron. And after her comments, what is most frustrating to you about adults?
Okay, so because I am the only young person up here, I feel that I need to represent more than just myself. So a good colleague of mine, it's funny to say, I'm 17, is Milo Weatherall. He's the one who spoke at the city council meeting, and he and his associates will tell you that the number one thing is that this is our future, and yet it's disregarded as such because it is not the future of the older generation necessarily, and they can't seem to see past that fact. So that is a really large concern. Personally, and the adults up here are exceptions to this, I find that climate change rhetoric is so often demonizing to those who don't agree with us, and any good redder knows that is no good strategy. We can't get through to people by attacking them and demonizing them. That just creates more alienation and division in a society. And if we want to build a good world, how are we going to do that by eliminating half of the people? Climate change is not a left or a right, or shouldn't be a left or a right issue. It is a humanities issue. And so I don't know how, as together, we're gonna try to fix this by not recognizing half of the population. So that's my main.
No, the only other thing I would add to that is, in some ways, and this was the challenge we had when I ran Next Gen Climate with Tom Steyer, in some ways we need to scale this down, because it can seem so daunting what we have to do, and the reality is that it takes action from every single human being on this earth, and every single person in this room, every single person on stage, and every single one of us to do something dramatic and do something productive towards the solution. So we're going to innovate, and then we're going to give those ideas to Jared Huffman to take to Washington, D.C., but we're also going to all take action, every single one of us, in our own lives.
Excellent. Okay. Secretary Rodriguez, we've seen fires envelop 1% of California this year, 5% in the last few years. How do we deal with with both fires, but also the methane leaks we've seen in Porter Ranch and elsewhere? How do we think about this in terms of California's strategy?
Yeah, let me say that we understand that it's easier to regulate emissions from a smokestack or a tailpipe than to regulate Mother Nature itself. And so we realize we need to invest more in our forests and our wetlands, in our working lands. And so we just announced yesterday that we're going to invest $670 million out of the current budget into looking to what we can do to better manage our natural and working lands here in the state, because we know we need to do something about the forests. We know that the situation that creates these fires is only going to get worse over time. We've got 129 million dead and dying trees in the state. So we're investing heavily in programs that will provide better management of these natural and working lands. The goal is to increase management in forests to 500,000 acres a year. We've got 33 million acres of forests in the land, so we've got quite a sizable job out in front of us, but we know we need to bring that into the equation. We know that's part of the overall approach to climate change, and so we're committed to working on it. The governor started a forest task force in May that is really focused on better dealing with our forests, managing them in a way so that they won't create the situations for these fires in the future.
Thanks so much. So as the father of two interracial daughters, the next question is a really challenging one for Christiana. How does racism figure into this equation? And how do we overcome that in this kind of broader sustainability landscape?
Well, I would say two things. First, racism in this country, but not only in this country, in many others, have historical roots. And I think we have to respect that, understand that, and certainly commit to never allowing it to happen again. At the same time, side by side with the history of racism of every country, at the bottom of all of that is the belief that some people are superior to others. It is the false belief that some have more rights over others. And both of these are fundamentally wrong. They are totally untrue. And what we're called upon to do as people, and certainly as stewards of this planet, is to extend the arc of love beyond those in our family, beyond those that we know and love, all the way to the outer boundaries of the planet, covering all of those who we do not know.
This is a question for anyone here, but really I suspect it's going to come to Matt, at least in part, and that is that for all the great things in California, fracking is still legally on the table. How do we think about the benefits of natural gas? They are more complementary renewables, but the problems, the leakage rates, and so anyone to comment, but I suspect you're going to be partly on the hook for this one.
Who wants to go first?
You start.
We're doing quick.
I'll quickly make a comment. It's time to ban fracking. Sorry, Matt.
Thanks, that's really great. Look, I will tell you that Fran Pavley also introduced legislation several years ago to really double down on our regulation of oil production in the state, including fracking. We have a much more rigorous program today than we did 10 years ago. And the State Water Resources Control Board and the regional boards and the Air Board are really involved in monitoring the effects of oil and gas development in the United States, in California, including fracking. But let me be absolutely clear. We cannot achieve our goals for being carbon neutral if we don't do something about petroleum use. We understand that. We've got a number of programs that are designed to reduce petroleum use right now. And that includes the low carbon fuel standard, the cap and trade program. A lot of that funding is coming through oil companies, refineries that have to pay for the emissions that they've got out there right now. And so we know we've got to reduce petroleum use and fracking in the state. So we're heading in that direction. The real question is just timing and developing a plan that will make sure that we can make that transition to a society that doesn't require the use of petroleum anymore. And we're working on that. We're going to get there. And in fact, I'll just give you this number. Right now, in our latest figures, our emissions in California are 429 million metric tons of CO2 a year. Our goal for 2030 puts us at around 260 million metric tons. We can't get there unless we significantly cut back on petroleum use. So it's part of our overall program. We know we've got to do it. It's just a question of the timing.
Another question for anyone, and that is that agriculture is critical to our survival. It's also an area where many of the poorest people are living at the subsistence levels. What are some of the opportunities to make agriculture smart, either learning from California, making us more water smart, or working elsewhere to do a better job here?
There are going to be a number of answers. We could have an entire panel on this subject, and we probably should. But one thing I will suggest is we need to support local agriculture. We should not depend on distant concentrated feeding lots and industrial scale agriculture where all of our food has to be shipped many miles, right now at least, burning carbon along the way. We should support gardens and community gardens and school gardens and the kind of sustainable family scale agriculture that I think many of us are proud of here in Marin.
And if I could add on to that, and we will have a panel on local food and food waste and carbon sequestration as part of Drawdown Marin. We have tremendous opportunities here in Marin County, as you all know, given the strength of our local agriculture and the strength of our organic farming here in the county. We have our Marin Carbon Project that's gotten way ahead on the state and is now truly scaling up to bring carbon sequestration to counties all over the state of California. So I think the work that we've done in Marin County has put us at the forefront, and there's a lot more we need to do, and you'll be hearing more about this as part of our Drawdown Marin activities and initiative going forward.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. All right, well, this is really going to bring the evening to the close, but to go back to the federal and to international level, I'm going to ask about both Congressman Huffman and then Christiana Figueres to give us what do they see as the next critical things in the next couple years to do, either back when we get a change in D.C. or as we move to the COP24 in Poland and beyond. So we start with you, Congressman.
Well, I'll be quick. We've got to certainly stop the backsliding right away. Having a Democratic majority in the House will be an important potential stop against further rollbacks by the Trump administration. And that is good. But we then have to start restoring some of these pillars of our country's commitments to the Paris Agreement so that we can be ready to scale up to those next higher ambition goals. And so we've got to reconstruct the Clean Power Plan, maybe even do more than that. We've certainly got to allow the states to continue to innovate and lead, so we're going to have to defend California's clean car rule and the 14 states that have followed California. I'm working on that, and with a Democratic House, I think we can at least protect that states' rights piece of our greenhouse gas reductions policies. And then we've got to address keeping things in the ground. So we've got to protect the Arctic and the coastal areas where people don't want new drilling, and yet the Trump administration is trying to bring it to them. So stay tuned for lots of activity in a Democratic Congress to try to maybe undo the drilling plan that they slipped into their tax bill last year for the Arctic Refuge, and other ways in which we can protect the Arctic and other parts of our outer continental shelf, including permanent bans on new drilling off the West Coast. Just a few things to get us started.
Thank you, future speaker. And the last word, Ms. Jana, goes to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to join you here today. As you asked me that question, the visual image that came to me was of a swan. And the reason why that came to me is because I think it's necessary when we are facing the challenges that we are, that we do two things which swans do very beautifully together. Underwater, they pedal like hell. And we have to continue doing that, right? Because there is so much to do and it is so urgent. On the other hand, they also glide along the water and they look incredibly majestic because their sight is in the long term. So with the boots on the ground, we have to do all of the work that you've just said, but also keep our eyes on the stars and understand that we are on a path of evolution of mankind that is taking us to a radically different world that is decarbonized, that is safer, that is happier, that is healthier, and that this process, no matter what the hell happens in Washington and when, is irreversible. It is unstoppable. Yes, we will have some delays, but history will prove that we're on the right track.
Thank you to this exceptional panel, and thank the audience and the wonderful high school volunteers and our hosts. Have an excellent evening. Thank you all for being here.